Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder, and this is BRN AM for Monday, February 1st, 2021. At our top stories today, we'll get an update on fee litigation for retirement plans, and we'll talk about possible regulation and legislation for retirement in 2021. Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is David Levine. He's a principal with Groom Law Group, an employee benefits law firm based in Washington, D.C. David, thanks for joining us on the program this morning.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for having me. You know, it's an eagle flying alone without Kevin with me.
I know. Well, we had him on last month, but we're very pleased to have you on. And for those who want to tune in to David and Kevin regularly, one, you can check the groom.com website. They're always featured there, but also on our podcast, which runs every Sunday. So, David, let's start off, because I think one of the things that you really were anxious to talk about or wanted to talk about was the fee litigation, the status of fee litigation today. So what can you tell us? How are things proceeding in that realm?
I think it would be a lie to say fee litigation is slow. It's really, really busy. And so often people who watch you and all your programming or listen to the podcast, we can bore you to death with all the different cases because, let's be realistic, as a defense lawyer, we like to say a lot of them are cookie cutter. So for us right now, really litigation's booming, but I think the key is to really break it down into specific segments. What do you think about that, Jeff?
I think it's great. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different avenues, whether it's excessive fees, whether it's privacy, but you start.
Sure. And let's start with sort of the basics. We've had the excessive fee lawsuits against plan sponsors. That's group one. Then I'm going to list a couple of groups and then double back. Then we have the fee lawsuits against, I'll call it a product, whether it's proprietary product or some type of product. Then we have some other areas of lawsuits, which you mentioned privacy and cybersecurity and fraud lawsuits. And then we also have other very special lawsuits, whether it's actuarial factors and pension plans, the declining amount of church plan lawsuits, ESOPs or company stock. Those are a whole nother bunch of buckets. But what often gets the most attention are the fee lawsuits on plan sponsors and the service provider. What is your service basically too expensive? Is it conflicted? Those types of lawsuits. And those are the two that really get the bulk of the attention at this point.
And David, would you say that there has been an increase? Let's take excessive fees for a second, because there have been, as you said, excessive fee lawsuits for over a decade now. Have you seen that continue to grow in number, and has it broadened to other code sections? So before it was 401k, it's moved into 403, but has it really grown?
It has. Well, let me answer the last part first. It started with 401k, but I think it's all defined contribution is under the microscope. It has typically been the private sector employer plans. There's been occasional governmental ones, but governmental plans have unique challenges for plaintiffs to bring. And as someone who works with governmental plans too, I'm happy to see it hasn't come over to that spot. But on the 401k plans, it's definitely grown. Part of what it is there have been lawsuits over fees and conflicts even way before 2006. But the modern era kind of began in the mid-2000s. And in the last 3-4 years, what you've seen is an explosion partially driven by other law firms that normally hadn't actually been in the 401k fee lawsuit space coming in. These are firms that might have done securities work or other types of class action work, or these are people who broke off and separated from big law firms, and they basically set up new practices elsewhere. So as people move around, you basically have more players. There's a couple players who become prolific filers. And you can, if you ask the plaintiff side, I'm sure they will say, well, we think deeply about each case and why we do it. If you ask the defense side, we're apt to say these complaints don't really say anything that you can win on, and they're cookie cutter. The courts are still slicing and dicing, but I think that's why you're seeing some more wins for the defense. That's, to be realistic, there are very few wins. If you consider a win for a plaintiff a big monetary recovery, there's very few true wins in court. It's usually the defense wins, they fight it out, they win early, or they win after a long defense. Or what you also see is settlements. Settlements are huge. And that's a big example. Because take, for example, the Intel case. We've talked about it on the podcast many times. The Intel case is kind of a fee case, but it's also talking about the use of alternatives and defined contribution plans. But the decision in the most recent progress of the Intel case really went to say, look, we don't see that there's much of a claim stated here. Now, the plaintiffs can come back and refile, but you're seeing more and more courts do that, which is good for those who are interested in alts, but it's a broader takeaway in that case that simply because you have funds that may not be the absolute cheapest or may not have performed the best, it's not a 20/20 hindsight. But because the settlements are so big, there's so much money here, and there's belief, I know, on the side of the plaintiffs that they think that they're doing good things. I think we can disagree. You're seeing these grow, and they've branched out from 401ks to 403bs. We're involved in a lot of this MEP litigation, so you're seeing it expand at this point. And each of these groups is different, and they often try to say it's the same exact argument. And ERISA is a consistent law, but each type of plan is a bit different. But the plaintiffs' lawyers are very smart, a lot of them, and they've really evolved. So that's kind of my takeaway on the fee litigation at this point.
Yeah. And David, let's we've got a couple minutes, we've got 3 minutes left. But I don't want to miss privacy and data, because you and Kevin Walsh have really been at I think the forefront of this. You were there testifying in California for the CPPA. I think I get that right. And there are other rules in the European Union. There's GDPR, and maybe some of the other states are having here in the States or in the US are having similar rules. But what's the latest on that litigation? Because I know a lot of people are concerned about data and privacy.
Absolutely, and thank you for the kind words. And it's so funny, you say the acronyms. Sometimes, even though I do it all the time, I have to look at it because it's like CCPA, CPRA, like what is the term? WPA, there's all these different things. Then you think 1930s, WPA, Works Progress Administration, that can't be right. But anyway, I'm a history student, so I like those things. The current status, simply put, is I think it's important to break the segments. You have the lawsuits saying about security, and they blend between cybersecurity and fraud, and you're seeing a lot of a lot more of those cases where someone gets access. Sometimes there's a cyber element where they did it online, but a lot of the time it's old-fashioned fraud. But those cases are getting more visibility now, and you're seeing those move forward. And oftentimes they've been settling in a number of those cases, but people are still pushing those along because the days of larger margins for service providers and costs and just flexibility in budgets for corporate America have shrunk. So people are less willing to just automatically step up and say, I'm going to pay even if I didn't do it wrong. And I think that's something we're seeing there. But those types of breach cases often are settling. But separate and distinct, the privacy cases are really moving along. Privacy, at this point, there is the only decision that's really recent on this is the Northwestern decision in the 403B cases, which basically was a win for the defense about the use of plan information and privacy. But that hasn't stopped a bunch of the settlements in these cases from saying we're going to limit the use of data. There is a lawsuit like the one against Shell that's pending at this point that go into what's the use of data. My big takeaway is sometimes people are saying data is a plan asset. I think it's a jump to say that immediately. There's a lot of sort of issues, and this is Kevin's idea. I give him credit for it. Because if data is a plan asset, it becomes an infectious plan asset. Because unlike money where I give Jeff $10, if you give me $10, you don't have it anymore. But if I give you data, I still have a copy. So how do you make all this work? So I think we're in the early innings of this game at this point, but we'll have to see where it goes.
Yeah, and certainly employee benefits may be different than other types of data using Facebook or going on Amazon, et cetera. Well, David, I want to go to a very quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk to David about the legislative and regulatory agenda ahead in 2021. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms? especially for the smaller businesses. I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Hi folks, Joe Namath here, and if you're on Medicare, this is important. You're now entitled to eliminate copays and get dental care, dentures, eyeglasses, prescription coverage, in-home aids, unlimited transportation, and home-delivered meals, all at no additional cost. Plus, your zip code may have coverage with the Give Back benefit that adds money back to your Social Security check every month. Look, with the uncertainty of the virus and vaccines, you need to get everything you're entitled to. Here's the bottom line. Call to get significant benefits at no additional cost and see if your zip code has coverage with the Give Back benefit. Millions of people have trusted the Medicare Coverage Helpline. You can too. Call now. It's free.
Call 1-800-924-3920. That's 1-800-924-3920.
Welcome back. We're talking to David Levine of Groom Law Group. David, thanks so much for staying with us this morning.
Thanks for continuing to have me.
This is absolutely fascinating and really important to hear whether or not you're a plan sponsor, an employer who sponsors a retirement plan, or a participant in one of those plans. So David, let's look ahead. We've got a brand new administration, a brand new Congress, U.S. Senate and House of Representatives, and therefore a new regulatory apparatus as well. Maybe not apparatus, but people at the helm. What can you tell us about looking ahead in 2021 about what we could expect from Washington, D.C.?
Well, as someone who spent years on the podcast with you, Jeff, saying it's going to pass any day now, I have learned my lesson. So I am not going to promise anything is going to pass at any time.
Sure.
All right. With that said, now that I've caveated everything like any lawyer would, let's dive into the reality of it all at this moment. I think as a starting point, with full Democratic control, which is rather tenuous because a 50-50 tie in the Senate makes it really close, and a House that's barely Democratic, there's a real question is what's going to move forward. Now, retirement in the Trump era, even in the Obama era, and definitely in the Biden era, is an area where the Democrats and Republicans, they may fight like cats and dogs on many different things, but there's a lot of agreement at this point. So on the legislative side, Secure finally got over the line after 6-7 years of giving lawyers like me to talk about it. And we have a bunch of next-gen litigation sitting in the wings that's been proposed. We have Secure 2.0, which Chairman Neal and Ranking Member Brady are both on board with, example of Democrat-Republican. Similarly, we have Senators Portman and Cardin in the Senate with their Retirement Security and Savings Act that they introduced. It's been over a year now. But at the same time, those bills have a lot of similarities in it. You see things from Elizabeth Warren, but you'll see like Bobby Scott, and you'll see other people all kind of weighing in. The key takeaway on this, retirement seems to be an area where the parties can actually get together and agree and reach agreement. That's what moves forward. So I would expect that you will see progress, but knowing that things like impeachment trials, fights over filibusters, fights over who is a sympathizer, who's not. I'm not going to get into the politics of that, but that distracts from moving legislation. So the timing is TBD, but there's a lot that I think will happen. First, for those who are in the multi-employer pension plan area, I think that eventually some relief is going to happen there. Not everybody's there, but it's important to mention. I think Secure 2.0, things like automatic enrollment mandates and things like that for people who don't have plans, addressing the interaction between federal and state plan issues, 403Bs, the use of CITs and 403Bs and in the role of pooled employer plans is definitely going to pick up. There's a lot of cleanup items. One of the sleepers I think that's out there that's shown up in some of the legislation is the ability to roll Roth IRA money into a plan. Right now, it's a one-way funnel. I think that that's a huge thing because we all talk about the money flow in the next couple of years sort of flattening in 401k before it kicks up again as the millennial and Gen Z are sort of kicked into these plans. But if you allow Roth money to move in, I'm sure there will be some who still say the IRA is better, but there's going to be some employers who say, bring your money to us. So I think that's a big item. There's a million things in here. You could call it a holiday bill, a Christmas tree bills. I think that there's going to need to be some work to harmonize. And you might even, as we talked on our last segment, have some privacy discussions as well. I know that's on the radar in the benefits world, but we'll have to see what happens. But then there's regulatory. So maybe we should talk about that.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, David, because one of the areas that, and we don't have Kevin here to talk missing participants, and we did get some guidance there, but one of maybe the areas of difference, I'm not going to say disagreement, difference, is on ESG, those ESG and governance and sustainability, and I know there's some work being done there, but give us the lay of the land in terms of the regulatory changes that we might expect.
Sure. Well, clearly, every time you switch administrations, you get the order that says, hold the presses. Anything that's not effective, freeze it. And we're seeing that with the Biden administration. And they are taking some significant steps because at the end of any prior administration, the word is burrow in. They try to burrow in their people. They try to get guidance out. Every administration does it. And the Biden administration is now reacting to it just as the Trump administration did. I think that, you put it best. One of the executive orders from President Biden was that at this point, the DOL needs to reevaluate the ESG guidance, the pecuniary factor guidance, about putting economics first, basically, is the way you describe it, in being a plan fiduciary in investments. Because the idea of what is first and when you balance things and when there's flexibility has varied between Dems and Republicans for 30 years. And I think they're talking about walking it back. There oddly is a lot of agreement in the retirement industry, whether it's in investors or people in the investment side, that a lot of them like ESG. Not everybody does, but it's a much broader coalition than you might normally see where there's some disagreement, which I find fascinating. What makes it challenging is some of the ESG rules are actually already in effect. So the Department of Labor has to go back and do proper rulemaking to change these up. And you're seeing a balance. Like I've talked to consultants and advisors and money managers where they're asking each other, how are you complying? It's a bit of an evolving world right now. I'm wondering if maybe there'll be a non-enforcement position taken by the Biden DOL at some point as they figure this out, but we will have to see. So that's a big one. Similarly, one of my favorites, PEPs, pooled employer plans, you're going to see more guidance on that. I think that's a huge one. Because there's a lot of questions as to business models. Some people say at a 60,000 foot level, there's 3 models. But once you drop to 40 or 30,000 feet, I can describe you dozens, if not hundreds of business models for PEPs. And the DOL under the Trump administration really focused on registration. And how these PEPs work and how the different roles work is a big thing. You're going to see them roll out. And it's going to be a while before we sort of get to more consistency in how everybody does things. I think there may be a wide range of options. As someone who likes a free market, I may be a centrist, but I like a free market. I think it's going to mean we're going to have some great innovations for what we see on the market, and we'll have to see. But I'm expecting DOL guidance there. Lastly, I think it's important to talk about like fiduciary rule type of things at this point. The Trump administration obviously reinstated the old 5-part test and as well came out with a new exemption that for PEPs has some quirks in it that may not work so well for PEPs given the roles people play, but B, not everybody is thrilled with. And it's the classic debate, would you like what a Republican administration does, or maybe the Democrats will do something more? Because people sometimes say Democrats are bad for business, Republicans are good. There's a lot more gray in this world than that. And what I think is very likely to happen is you probably will see some revisiting of the fiduciary rule, regulation best interest at the SEC, which dovetails in, which again, pick up rollovers in a way that not everybody thought would happen. That's going to get some revisiting over at the SEC probably. So I think that's a big thing that could impact service providers because what's their business models? There's been a lot of consolidation based on cross-selling. Will it impact some of those business models? And plan sponsors, you'll probably get a whole bunch of new disclosures and new discussion items as these rules keep evolving. And you're going to have to figure out your way through it, which means those who are helping people, guide people, will have a lot of work to do in coming years.
Yeah, it sounds like, David, you're going to be, you and Kevin and the team at Groom will be extremely busy in this regard. But we're going to leave it there. Absolutely fascinating conversation. I hope the audience really was able to take a lot away and maybe bring it back to their committee meetings or even back around the kitchen table to discuss. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to having you back on the show again very soon.
Thanks, Jeff. It's good to be here.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, then drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, all in one place, check out today's edition of our newsletter, The Morning Pulse. So until tomorrow, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.